Commander Jihan floated in the command center of his massive warship, watching the small metal object spin slowly in the containment field. His forearms moved across the control panels with practiced ease, while his large, dark eyes studied the primitive device his fleet had just captured at the very edge of known space. The probe was laughably simple compared to Vorthak technology. Crude metal plating, basic chemical propulsion systems, and communication equipment that belonged in a museum. But what made Jihan's skin crawl were the broadcasts stored inside this pathetic cylinder. He had spent hours reviewing the transmissions. From the planet these creatures called Earth, the images were disturbing beyond belief. Massive explosions destroying entire cities, primitive beings killing each other with metal projectiles, governments that changed every few years through something called elections, creating chaos where there should be order. Billions of these, humans packed onto a single world, all speaking different languages and following different beliefs. Admiral Taekwon drifted over to examine the data himself. His scarred face showed the disgust that all proper Vorthak citizens felt when confronted with such disorder. The Admiral had conquered 47 worlds for the Empire, and he had never seen anything quite this messy. "Look at this chaos, Commander," Taekwon said, pointing to footage of human wars. "These creatures fight constantly among themselves. They poison their own atmosphere. They consume resources without any central planning. Emperor Hyunsik was right to classify them as a contamination risk to galactic civilization." Dr. Minho, the expedition's chief scientist, joined them at the viewing station. His pale green skin seemed to grow even paler as he studied the human broadcasts. As a xenobiologist, he had examined hundreds of species across the galaxy, but none had disturbed him quite like these humans. "Sir, I have completed my analysis," Minho reported, his voice trembling slightly. "These humans have not achieved even the most basic requirements for galactic citizenship. They have no unified government, no population control, no resource management protocols. They actually seem to celebrate individual differences rather than working toward species unity." The three Vorthak officers stood in horrified silence for a moment. In their perfectly ordered empire, such chaos was unthinkable. Every citizen knew their place, followed the same laws, and worked toward the same goals. The idea of billions of beings all thinking and acting differently was like a nightmare come to life. "The contamination risk is severe," Admiral Taekwon continued. "If word of their existence spreads to our outer colonies, it could inspire dangerous thoughts. Disorder could spread like a plague through our carefully maintained civilization." Commander Jihan nodded slowly. The decision seemed obvious, but Imperial protocol demanded they follow proper procedures. Even the most chaotic species deserved one chance to join the galactic community properly. "Dr. Minho, what is your recommendation?" Jihan asked formally. The scientist's answer came without hesitation. "Standard planetary sterilization, Commander. These humans are too primitive and too chaotic to ever become proper galactic citizens. They will only spread their disorder to other worlds. Should I prepare the annihilation protocols?" But Commander Jihan held up one of his hands. "No, Doctor. The Emperor's orders were specific. We must offer them the standard choice first, even if we know what their answer will be." Admiral Taekwon looked surprised. In all his years of conquest, he had rarely bothered with warnings for species this primitive. "Commander, surely we can skip the formalities with such obvious primitives." "The law is the law, Admiral," Jihan replied firmly. "Every species receives one warning, no matter how hopeless their situation appears. Prepare the standard ultimatum message." The crystalline message pod was a work of art compared to the crude human probe. Made from materials that existed only in the heart of stars, it could survive re-entry through any atmosphere and translate its message into any language. The pod contained a simple choice that had been offered to thousands of species across the galaxy. As the pod launched toward the distant blue planet, Commander Jihan felt a moment of something that might have been pity. These humans had no idea what was coming. They would receive 24 of their planetary rotations to make their choice, but everyone aboard the Vorthak fleet already knew what that choice would be. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Young-ho was awakened in the middle of the night by an urgent call from his science advisor. Something impossible had crashed in the Pacific Ocean, and early analysis suggested it was not from Earth. Within hours, the crystalline pod sat in a secure facility while the world's best scientists struggled to understand what they were looking. And the message, when it finally came through, was polite but terrifying in its simplicity. Submit to the Galactic Empire or face complete destruction. One day to decide the fate of every human being who had ever lived. Dr. Sunwoo had not slept in 36 hours. Her eyes burned as she stared at the alien symbols dancing across her computer screen, but she could not stop now. The fate of every person on Earth depended on understanding exactly what these creatures wanted from humanity. The crystalline pod had revealed its secrets slowly, each layer of translation more terrifying than the last. The aliens called themselves the Vorthak Empire, and they ruled over 10,000 star systems with absolute authority. Their message was written in a way that suggested they had done this many times before. "The translation is complete," Sunwoo announced to the emergency council session via video link. Her voice cracked from exhaustion, but her words were clear. "They are giving us exactly 24 hours to make a choice. Submit to their empire and become their subjects, or they will destroy our entire planet." The room fell silent. President Young-ho sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the most powerful leaders on Earth. For the first time in human history, every major nation had agreed to meet together to face this impossible decision. General Min-jae spoke first, his military training making him focus on the practical reality. "Dr. Sunwoo, what do we know about their capabilities?" The scientist pulled up images of the alien probe's materials on the main screen. "The metal this pod is made from should not exist according to our understanding of physics. It survived re-entry at impossible speeds without even getting warm. If this is just their messenger, imagine what their weapons must be like." The general nodded grimly. "Then we have no choice. We cannot fight technology we do not understand. Surrender is our only option for survival." But Foreign Minister Su Jin slammed her hand on the table. "Survival as what? As slaves? The message makes it clear that submission means total control over our governments, our resources, our people. They will turn us into another conquered species in their empire." "At least our children would live," argued the representative from Brazil. "To live as what?" Su Jin shot back. "The message talks about proper galactic citizenship and species unity. They want to turn us into copies of themselves. Our cultures, our languages, our ways of life would all disappear." President Young-ho had been quiet through most of the debate, but now he spoke up. "Dr. Sunwoo, does the message give us any hint about what happens to species that resist?" The scientist's face went pale. "The language is very clinical, but they mention planetary sterilization as their standard procedure for non-compliant worlds. Based on the context, I believe they mean they will kill every living thing on Earth." The room erupted in arguments. Some leaders insisted that any chance of survival was better than certain death. Others argued that a life of slavery was not worth living. The clock on the wall showed they had less than 18 hours remaining to make their choice. Representative Kim from South Korea stood up slowly. "My ancestors faced a similar choice once. Foreign invaders came with superior weapons and demanded submission. Some of my people chose to collaborate, thinking it would save lives. But in the end, the invaders still tried to erase our culture, our language, our identity. The only thing that saved us was those who chose to resist, even when resistance seemed hopeless." The Chinese representative nodded. "My country has faced many invasions throughout history. We have learned that sometimes the choice is not between death and life, but between dying as free people or living as something less than human." As the hours passed, something unprecedented began to happen. Despite their many differences and historical conflicts, the world's leaders started to agree on something. Nation after nation cast their vote for the same impossible choice. When Ambassador Jae-hyun stood to deliver humanity's final answer to the alien probe, his hands shook slightly, but his voice was steady. "We have heard your ultimatum and discussed it thoroughly. The United Nations, representing every nation and people of Earth, gives you this response. We reject your offer of submission. We choose to remain free, whatever the cost. If you want our world, you will have to take it from us. The message was transmitted toward the waiting alien fleet, carrying with it the collective will of 8 billion human beings who had chosen death over slavery. High above Earth, Commander Jihan received the human response with genuine surprise. In 3 centuries of imperial expansion, no species had ever refused their generous offer of survival through submission. He almost laughed at their foolish bravery. "Admiral Taekwon," he called across the command deck, "the humans have made their choice. They prefer extinction to civilization." How amusing. But as he prepared the invasion orders, Commander Jihan felt a small flutter of unease. There had been something in the human's voice that suggested they knew something he did not. The morning sky above Earth suddenly filled with shadows that had never existed before. 300 massive warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their dark hulls blocking out the sun across multiple continents. Each vessel stretched over 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could turn mountains into dust. On the surface, millions of humans looked up at the impossible sight. Children stopped playing in parks. Workers abandoned their offices to stare through windows. Traffic came to a standstill as drivers pulled over to witness what everyone knew might be humanity's final day. Commander Jihan stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Earth rotate slowly beneath his fleet. The blue and green planet looked so peaceful from space, with white clouds drifting across its surface. It was hard to believe that this tiny world had just declared war on the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Admiral Taekwon moved between the tactical displays, admiring the perfect positioning of his warships. 300 vessels, Commander. Each one carries enough firepower to destroy a continent. The humans will surrender the moment they see what they face. Dr. Minho was busy scanning the planet with his instruments, cataloging Earth's pathetic defensive systems. "Sir, I am detecting approximately 12,000 nuclear missiles scattered across the planet's surface. Their most advanced spacecraft barely reach their own moon. No energy shields, no plasma weapons, no orbital defense platforms. This is almost embarrassing." The alien scientist pulled up holographic displays showing Earth's military capabilities. Primitive jet aircraft that moved slower than Imperial shuttles. Ground vehicles that still used wheels instead of hover technology. Soldiers carrying weapons that fired small metal bullets instead of energy beams. "Look at this," Dr. Minho continued, pointing to images of human naval vessels. "They still use ships that float on water. Water, Commander. As if they had never heard of anti-gravity systems." Admiral Taekwon activated the fleet's communication system, preparing to accept Earth's inevitable surrender. He had done this dozens of times before. Once a primitive species saw the size and power of an imperial fleet, they always chose submission over destruction. "Attention, inhabitants of the planet Earth." His voice boomed across every radio and television frequency on the planet. "This is Admiral Taekwon of the Vorthak Imperial Fleet. You have seen our power. You understand that resistance is futile. I am prepared to accept your surrender and begin the process of integrating your world into our glorious empire." He waited for the response, expecting the usual tearful pleas for mercy and promises of cooperation. Instead, a steady human voice came back across the communication channels. "This is General Dowan, speaking for the United Earth Defense Command," the voice said calmly. "We received your ultimatum yesterday, and we gave you our answer. Now let me give you some advice, Admiral. You showed us your fleet because you thought it would make us afraid. But you made a mistake." Admiral Taekwon frowned. This was not the usual response. "What mistake, Primitive?" "You gave us 24 hours to prepare," General Dowan replied. "You told us exactly when you would arrive. You showed us your technology in that message pod. Most importantly, you assumed that because we fight each other, we cannot fight together. That was your biggest mistake." The human general's voice grew stronger, more confident. "You gave us one warning, Admiral. Now here is ours. Leave our system. Immediately, or you will discover why no invader in Earth's history has ever successfully conquered our world." The communication ended with a sharp click, leaving the Vorthak fleet in stunned silence. Admiral Taekwon's 4 eyes widened in disbelief. No species had ever threatened the Imperial fleet before. Dr. Minho quickly ran new scans of the planet's surface. "Sir, I am detecting some unusual activity. There appear to be massive construction projects that were not there when we first arrived. Underground excavations, new facilities being built at incredible speed." "In 24 hours, Commander Jihan asked, moving closer to examine the data. "It seems impossible, but the energy signatures are unmistakable. The humans have been building something across their entire planet." Admiral Taekwon's laughter echoed through the bridge and was transmitted to every ship in the fleet. "They think they can build defenses in a single day that will stop the Imperial fleet? These primitives are even more foolish than I thought." But Commander Jihan was studying the tactical displays more carefully. Something about the human general's tone bothered him. The voice had not carried fear or desperation. Instead, it had sounded almost eager, as if the humans were looking forward to the coming battle. "Dr. Minho, focus your scans on those construction sites. I want to know exactly what they built." As the scientist worked, Admiral Taekwon prepared the invasion orders. "Commander, shall we begin with orbital bombardment or ground assault?" Jihan hesitated. In his centuries of service to the Empire, he had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were telling him that something was very wrong with this situation. "Give me a few more minutes to study their defenses," he replied. "I want to understand what they think they can accomplish." Below them, Earth continued its slow rotation, looking as peaceful and defenseless as ever. But somewhere on that blue planet, 8 billion humans were preparing to show the galaxy what happened when you gave Earth time to get ready for war. The massive Imperial dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling meteors, their hulls glowing from the heat of re-entry. Captain Bora gripped her plasma rifle tighter as she watched the blue planet grow larger through the transport's viewing port. This should be the easy part, she thought. Land, accept surrender, begin the occupation. Her squad of 20 Vorthak soldiers sat in perfect silence, their advanced armor systems humming quietly. Each warrior carried weapons that could level buildings and wore protective gear that had never been penetrated by primitive technology. They had done this exact mission on 47 other worlds, and it always ended the same way. "Approaching landing zone Seoul," the pilot announced. "No defensive fire detected, no aircraft attempting. Intercept." "Standard occupation protocols in effect." Captain Bora nodded. The humans were being smart, choosing not to waste lives on futile resistance. The sooner they accepted Imperial rule, the sooner the real work of civilizing this chaotic world could begin. The dropship touched down in what appeared to be the center of the human city. Through her helmet's sensors, Bora could see massive buildings stretching in every direction, wide streets that should have been packed with vehicles, and sidewalks designed for millions of inhabitants. But everything was empty. "Deploy and secure the area," she commanded, leading her squad down the transport's ramp. Their boots clanked against the human concrete as they spread out in standard formation. The silence was eerie, broken only by the distant sound of wind between the tall buildings. "Captain," called Sergeant Minsick from across the street, "the government buildings appear to be abandoned. No signs of recent occupation." Bora frowned inside her helmet. This was unusual. Normally, local leaders would be waiting to formally surrender, surrounded by crowds of frightened civilians eager to cooperate with their new rulers. "Search the area," she ordered. "The humans must be hiding somewhere nearby." Her soldiers moved through the empty streets with practiced efficiency, checking doorways and scanning for life signs. The city felt like a ghost town, as if millions of people had simply vanished overnight. That was when Bora noticed the small changes. Piles of rubble that looked deliberately placed, windows that had been covered with metal sheets, streets that seemed to have new obstacles installed across them. The humans had not just fled, they had prepared. "Captain!" Corporal Jiwon's voice crackled through the communication system. "I'm detecting movement in the underground areas, multiple heat signatures, but they're moving in organized patterns." Before Bora could respond, the world exploded around her. The attack came from everywhere at once. Manholes in the street burst open as humans emerged firing weapons that should not have been able to hurt Imperial armor. Windows in seemingly empty buildings shattered as more projectiles rained down from above. Even the piles of rubble revealed themselves to be camouflaged fighting positions, but these were not the primitive bullets her intelligence reports had described. Whatever the humans were firing cut through her soldiers' armor like it was made of paper. Energy shields that had protected Imperial forces for centuries flickered and died under the assault. "This is impossible," Sergeant Minsick shouted as his armor took hit after hit. "Their weapons should not be able to penetrate our defenses." Captain Bora dove for cover behind an overturned vehicle as more humans appeared from hidden positions. These were not trained soldiers, she realized with shock. They were ordinary civilians, men and women of all ages, fighting with a coordination that should have taken years to develop. A young human woman, barely out of adolescence, fired some kind of modified energy weapon that sent blue lightning crackling across Bora's shield systems. An elderly man emerged from a doorway carrying what looked like a farming tool converted into a plasma cutter. Children who should have been in school were coordinating attacks with handheld devices that somehow jammed Imperial communication frequencies. Across the planet, identical scenes were playing out in every major city. Dr. Yuna had spent humanity's final day doing something the Vorthak had never encountered before. Instead of building traditional defenses, she had shared the alien technology analysis with every scientist, engineer, and inventor on Earth. The crystalline message pod had revealed its secrets to human ingenuity. Within hours, Earth's factories were producing weapons designed to exploit weaknesses in Imperial armor. Communication frequencies were analyzed and jammed. Energy signatures were reverse-engineered and turned against their creators. Most importantly, humanity had done something no other species had ever attempted. Instead of relying on their military alone, they had turned every single person on the planet into a potential fighter. Teachers who understood alien mathematics, mechanics who could modify enemy technology, students who learned faster than Imperial, computers could adapt. In his command ship high above Earth, Commander Jihan watched the casualty reports with growing disbelief. Red indicators flashed across his tactical display as Imperial forces took losses around the globe. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Cheung, "we are receiving distress calls from landing zones on every continent. Our forces are encountering unexpected resistance." Admiral Taekwon rushed to the communication station. "Unexpected resistance? From primitives who fight with chemical propulsion?" "Sir, it appears their weapons have been modified. Somehow they are penetrating our armor and disrupting our shields." Dr. Minho pulled up sensor readings from the planet's surface. "Commander, this is unprecedented. No species has ever reverse-engineered Imperial technology so quickly. It should have taken them decades to understand our systems." But Commander Jihan was beginning to understand something his colleagues had missed. These humans were not just fighting back, they were learning. Every Imperial weapon fired taught them something new. Every piece of alien technology they captured was immediately studied and improved upon. On the surface, Captain Bora's squad was down to half strength, pinned down by humans who seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear just as quickly. Her communication with the command ship was filled with static as human jamming systems learned to disrupt Imperial frequencies in real time. "This is Captain Bora, requesting immediate extraction," she called desperately. "The humans are not behaving according to standard conquest protocols. They are adapting to our tactics faster than we can deploy them." Above Earth, the Vorthak fleet faced a truth that would shake the Empire to its foundations. For the first time in centuries, the Imperial war machine was learning what it felt like to be outmatched by an enemy that refused to fight by the rules. Engineer. Seojun had not slept in 3 days, but his hands remained steady as he soldered the final connections on what might be humanity's most important invention. The device looked like a pile of junk, car parts welded to pieces of the alien message pod, connected by cables that had been torn from old computers, but the readings on his improvised scanner showed it was working perfectly. "The frequency disruptor is ready," he announced to the crowded workshop. Around him, dozens of other engineers and scientists worked frantically on similar projects. The basement of the Seoul Institute of Technology had become humanity's most secret weapons laboratory, and Seojun had become one of its most valuable assets. Dr. Hana looked up from her own workstation, where she was connecting modified radio equipment to alien communication fragments. Excellent timing. I just broke through another layer of their command protocols. We can now intercept their tactical communications in real time. What the two humans had accomplished in 72 hours should have been impossible. The Vorthak Empire's technology was thousands of years more advanced than anything on Earth. Their communication systems used quantum frequencies that human science barely understood. Their weapons operated on principles that Earth's physicists had only theorized about. But Seojin and Hana had something the Empire did not expect: pure human stubbornness combined with a complete willingness to ignore the rules of what should be possible. "Look at this," Seojin said, pointing to his scanner readings. "Their armor uses a specific energy field to deflect projectiles, but the field has to adjust constantly to different types of attacks. If we can make it adjust too quickly, it overloads." "And fails." Dr. Hana nodded, understanding immediately. "So we need weapons that change their characteristics randomly, faster than their armor can compensate." "Exactly, and I think I know how to do it." While Seojun worked on armor-piercing weapons, Dr. Hana had been solving an even bigger problem. The Vorthak forces coordinated their attacks through a complex communication network that should have been impossible to break. But Hana had realized something important. The aliens were used to fighting predictable enemies who followed logical military strategies. Humans, she had discovered, were anything but predictable. "I'm broadcasting false orders on their command frequencies," she explained to the other resistance leaders gathered around her station. "But instead of trying to confuse them, I'm giving them conflicting information that forces them to make choices." President Young-ho's voice crackled through the secure communication line from his bunker command center. "What kind of choices?" "The kind that reveal their weaknesses," Hana replied with a grim smile. "When I broadcast that civilians are evacuating from the north, their forces move to intercept. When I report military buildup in the south, they redirect their resources. Each movement shows us how they think, how they prioritize targets, how they make decisions." Above ground, the battle for Earth continued with an intensity that shocked both sides. Admiral Taekwon had deployed his forces, expecting a quick victory against primitive resistance. Instead, he found himself fighting an enemy that seemed to learn from every mistake and adapt to every tactic. Lieutenant Chae-young's reports from the surface grew more frustrated each hour. "Sir, we secured the government district as planned, but the humans abandoned it before we arrived. When we moved to the industrial sector, they had already evacuated their equipment. Every time we think we understand their strategy, they change everything." "They are not following any recognizable military doctrine," Admiral Taekwon complained to Commander Jihan. "They will sacrifice an entire city block to save a single family, but then launch devastating attacks on our most defended positions. Their tactics make no logical sense." But Commander Jihan was beginning to see a pattern that his admiral missed. The humans were not fighting to win territory or destroy the Imperial fleet. They were fighting to learn. Every engagement taught them something new about Vorthak technology, tactics and weaknesses. Dr. Minho's analysis confirmed this disturbing trend. "Sir, our combat algorithms are designed to predict enemy behavior based on logical military principles. But these humans do not follow logical principles. They make decisions based on emotion, individual initiative, and what they call gut instinct." "How do we fight an enemy that refuses to be logical?" Admiral Taekwon demanded. The answer came from an unexpected source. A young human named Minjun, barely 18 years old, had figured out how to hack into Imperial communication systems using nothing but a modified gaming computer and pieces of alien technology. His breakthrough allowed Dr. Hana to do something unprecedented. She began broadcasting human music, poetry, and art directly into Vorthak command frequencies. The effect was immediate and devastating. Imperial soldiers, raised in a culture of absolute order and unity, found themselves exposed to human creativity and individuality for the first time. Some became confused, others curious, and a few began to question their orders. "Sir," Lieutenant Chae-young reported with panic in her voice, "some of our soldiers are requesting permission to study human cultural transmissions instead of following attack orders." Admiral Taekwon nearly dropped his communication device. They want to study what? Human art, sir. Music, poetry, stories. The transmissions are unlike anything in our cultural database. In his underground command center, President Young-ho smiled as he listened to the reports. The global resistance network that had seemed impossible to create was working exactly as planned. Every factory, every school, every hospital had become part of the war effort. Teachers were training children to use alien technology. Doctors were developing treatments for energy weapon injuries. Farmers were growing food in underground facilities that could survive orbital bombardment. Most importantly, millions of ordinary humans had become extraordinary warriors, not through military training, but through the simple determination to remain free. Seojun, the president called through the communication system, how many of your frequency disruptors are ready for deployment? 50,000, sir, with more coming off the production lines every hour. Every major city now has the ability to neutralize Imperial armor and shields. And Dr. Hannah, what is the status of the communication disruption? We now control approximately 30% of their command network, Mr. President. Give us another day, and we might be able to turn their own ships against each other. The impossible was happening. Humanity was not just surviving the Imperial invasion, they were winning. Emperor Hyunsik slammed his 4 fists against the crystalline command table as the latest reports from Earth filled his private chambers. 3 centuries of Imperial expansion, and never once had a primitive species caused such humiliation to his forces. The holographic displays showed casualty numbers that should have been impossible. Thousands of Imperial soldiers defeated by creatures who had not even achieved interstellar travel. Enough of this embarrassment, the Emperor roared, his voice carrying the authority that had conquered half the galaxy. I do not care what clever tricks these humans have learned. I want their world reduced to molten rock within the next rotation. Admiral Taekwon's image flickered in the communication display, his scarred face showing the strain of weeks of unexpected combat. Your Imperial Majesty, perhaps we should consider alternative approaches. These humans have proven surprisingly resourceful. I do not want excuses, Admiral. I want results. The Emperor's eyes blazed with fury. Deploy the planet crackers immediately. If these primitives will not accept the gift of civilization, they can experience the gift of complete annihilation. The order traveled across space, at the speed of light, reaching the Imperial fleet orbiting Earth within minutes. Commander Jihan received the transmission with a mixture of relief and unease. Relief that the humiliating ground war would finally end, but unease about what humanity might do when faced with complete destruction. The planet cracker weapons had been used only 3 times in Imperial history, against worlds so dangerous that nothing could be allowed to survive. Each weapon could split continents and boil oceans, turning entire planets into fields of glowing debris. Dr. Minho supervised the charging of the massive weapon systems, their energy readings climbing to levels that made space itself shimmer around the Imperial fleet. Sir, weapons will be ready to fire in 1 hour. Total planetary sterilization should be complete within 6 rotations. But far below the Imperial fleet, Dr. Kyung-soo was putting the finishing touches on humanity's greatest engineering project. While other resistance leaders had focused on weapons and communication systems, she had spent every moment of the preparation time solving a different problem entirely: how to hide 8 billion people from weapons that could crack planets. The answer had come from an unexpected source. Earth's mining industry, combined with every construction company, subway system, and basement excavation project on the planet, working together to create something unprecedented in galactic history. Final structural checks complete. Dr. Kyung-soo reported from her position 3 kilometers beneath the surface of what used to be downtown Tokyo. Around her, a city larger than anything that had ever existed above ground stretched away in every direction. The deep colonies are ready to support full population transfer. President Young-ho's voice came through the communication system from his own bunker, now revealed to be just the top level of a massive underground complex. Dr. Kyung-soo, I need you to understand what you have accomplished. In 72 hours, you coordinated the construction of underground cities on every continent. How is this possible? The engineer's tired voice carried a note of pride that no amount of exhaustion could hide. Mr. President, you gave us the one thing we needed most, a reason to work together. Every government, every company, every individual on Earth contributed something. We used existing subway tunnels as starting points, connected natural cave systems, and dug new passages using every piece of heavy machinery on the planet. But 3 kilometers deep, the pressure alone should have made construction impossible. We learned from the alien technology, sir. Their message pod showed us new materials and construction techniques. We combined their knowledge with human engineering, and we built deeper than anyone thought possible. Above ground, the first Imperial planet cracker fired, sending a beam of pure energy that could melt mountains. The surface of Earth erupted in flames as weapons designed to destroy. Entire continents began their terrible work. Oceans boiled, forests became ash, and cities that had stood for thousands of years disappeared in seconds. But humanity was no longer on the surface. The underground cities that Dr. Kyung-soo had created were marvels of desperate engineering. Vast caverns supported by alien-inspired materials housed millions of people. Hydroponic farms stretched for kilometers, growing food under artificial suns. Manufacturing facilities continued producing weapons and equipment, even as the world above them burned. Most importantly, these underground complexes were not just shelters, they were launch bases. Captain Minji had been a commercial airline pilot just weeks ago. Now she sat in the cockpit of something that had never existed before, a spacecraft built from civilian aircraft parts, powered by reverse-engineered alien technology, and armed with weapons that should not have been possible for humans to create. Launch. Control, this is Eagle Squadron, she spoke into her headset, using call signs borrowed from old Earth movies. We are ready for launch from Tunnel Complex 7. Dr. Kyung-soo's voice came back through the communication system. Captain, you understand this is a one-way mission? Our launch systems can get you to space, but we cannot guarantee safe return. Minji looked around her cockpit at the improvised controls and jury-rigged life support systems. Behind her, 20 other pilots sat in equally impossible spacecraft, all of them volunteers who understood they might not survive the next hour. Launch control, we knew this was suicide when we signed up, but those aliens made one mistake. They gave us time to get angry. The launch tunnels opened simultaneously across the planet, shafts that extended from the deep underground cities to the burning surface allowed dozens of human spacecraft to launch directly into space. The ships were crude, dangerous, and built from spare parts, but they carried something the Empire had never encountered, humans who had absolutely nothing left to lose. The Imperial fleet detected the launches immediately, but Admiral Taekwon could not believe what his sensors were telling him. Dr. Minho, these readings cannot be correct. Are you telling me that primitives who barely reached their own moon are now launching combat spacecraft? Sir, I am detecting 47 separate launches from different points on the planet's surface. The spacecraft appeared to be armed and heading directly for our fleet. Commander Jihan watched the primitive human ships approaching his massive warships and felt something he had not experienced in decades: uncertainty. These humans had already proven they could adapt faster than Imperial computers could calculate. What would they do when they reached space? Captain Minji's voice crackled across both human and Imperial communication frequencies as her improvised spacecraft closed the distance to the enemy fleet. Imperial forces, this is Captain Minji of the Earth Defense Corps. You burned our world, but you did not burn our spirit. Now you get to see what happens when humans fight back. The first human spacecraft struck an Imperial destroyer with a modified nuclear warhead that had been enhanced with alien technology. The explosion that followed lit up the space around Earth like a new star, and for the first time in Imperial history, a Vorthak warship was destroyed by primitive enemies. The message was clear. Humanity was no longer hiding underground. They were coming to space, and they were bringing the fight directly to the Empire. The space around Earth had become a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams. What had once been the pristine formation of 300 Imperial warships now looked like a debris field stretching from Earth's orbit to the asteroid belt. Broken pieces of alien technology drifted alongside the remains of human spacecraft that had been built in basement workshops and launched from underground tunnels. Commander Jihan floated in his damaged command center, staring at tactical displays. That told a story no Imperial officer had ever seen before. Red markers showed the locations of destroyed Vorthak vessels, while green dots tracked the positions of remaining human resistance forces. The green dots vastly outnumbered the red ones. "Status report," he commanded. Though he already knew the answer would be devastating, Lieutenant Che-Yung's voice carried exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. "Sir, we have 87 operational vessels remaining. Fuel reserves are at 30%. Ammunition supplies are critically low, and the humans continue to launch new attacks every day. 87 ships, from 300, in just 6 months of fighting against primitives who had never left their home planet. Before this war began, the humans had done something that military strategists across the galaxy would study for centuries. They had turned space itself into their weapon. Instead of building massive warships to challenge the Imperial fleet directly, they had created thousands of small, fast, nearly invisible craft that struck without warning and disappeared before retaliation was possible. Pilot Inwu was one of the most dangerous humans in space, though he flew a spacecraft that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts in someone's garage. His ship was barely 10 meters long, held together with welded steel plates and powered by a fusion reactor that any sane engineer would have declared impossible to operate safely. But Inwu was not concerned with safety. He was concerned with killing as many Imperial soldiers as possible before his luck ran out. "Dragon 7 to Underground Command," he spoke into his headset as he maneuvered his tiny craft between the massive hulks of disabled Imperial vessels. "I have visual contact with target designation Fortress 12. Beginning attack run." Dr. Sun Wu's voice came back from the deep bunkers beneath Earth's surface. "Dragon 7, be advised that Fortress 12 is heavily defended. Recommend you wait for support." Inwu smiled grimly as he watched the alien warship grow larger in his view screen. "Underground Command, I have been flying solo missions for 4 months. Support is nice, but surprise is better." What made Inwu and pilots like him so dangerous was not their spacecraft or weapons, but their complete unpredictability. Imperial defensive systems were designed to track large vessels following logical flight patterns. They could not effectively target something that moved like Inwu's craft, diving through debris fields, using destroyed ships as cover, approaching from angles that defied military logic. His attack on Fortress 12 lasted exactly 37 seconds. Inwu's small ship emerged from behind a piece of floating wreckage, fired 2 modified nuclear missiles at the Imperial vessel's weakest point, and disappeared back into the debris field before the alien crew even realized they were under attack. The Imperial warship's shields held against the first missile, but the second one had been modified with technology reverse-engineered from the alien's own message pod. It cut through their defenses like they were made of paper, detonating inside the ship's main reactor. Fortress 12 died in a flash of brilliant light that could be seen from Earth's surface, taking with it 300 irreplaceable Imperial soldiers and decades of advanced technology. "Dragon 7 to Underground Command," Inwu reported calmly. "Fortress 12 is no longer operational, returning to base for refuel and rearm." But Inwu would never make it back to base. His fuel reserves, already dangerously low, ran out just as he reached Earth's atmosphere. His spacecraft burned up during re-entry, adding one more human name to the growing list of heroes who had given their lives to defend their world. Dr. Sunwu received the news of Inwu's death with the same mixture of grief and determination that had sustained humanity throughout the long war. Every loss hurt, but every loss also taught the survivors something new about how to hurt their enemies. "Attention all resistance cells," she broadcast on the hidden communication network that now spanned not just Earth, but dozens of other worlds across the galaxy. "Pilot Inwu has fallen, but his final mission destroyed another Imperial capital ship. His sacrifice brings us one step closer to victory." That was the message that had begun to spread throughout the Empire's conquered territories. Humans were winning. The news seemed impossible, but the evidence was undeniable. The mighty Imperial fleet that had arrived to easily conquer Earth was being systematically destroyed by primitives flying spacecraft built in underground workshops, on worlds that had been under imperial rule for centuries, enslaved populations began to whisper about the humans who had said no to the empire and lived to fight another day. Rebellion was a concept that most species had forgotten, but humanity was teaching the galaxy how to remember. Admiral Taekwon stood in the wreckage of his once proud flagship, surrounded by emergency repairs and improvised equipment. Half his command staff was dead, killed in human attacks that seemed to come from nowhere and strike at the worst possible moments. "Commander Jihan," he said quietly, "I need to ask you a question that no Imperial officer has ever had to ask before." Jihan looked up from a damage report that listed critical failures in every major system. "What question, Admiral? Is it possible that we are going to lose this war?" The question hung in the air between them like a confession of the unthinkable. The Imperial fleet had never lost a war. The very concept of defeat was so foreign that their language barely had words for it. But as Commander Jihan looked at the tactical display, showing 87 remaining ships surrounded by thousands of small human craft, he realized that the impossible had become inevitable. "Admiral," he said slowly, "I believe we already have." The hunters had become the hunted, and somewhere in the depths of space, humanity was preparing to deliver the final blow to an empire that had thought itself invincible. The war had been raging for 8 months, and Earth looked nothing like the blue jewel it had once been. The surface was scarred with massive craters where Imperial weapons had struck. Oceans had boiled away in some places, leaving salt flats that stretched to the horizon. Cities that had stood for centuries were now nothing but radioactive glass. But beneath the devastation, something extraordinary was happening. Humanity was not just surviving. They were thriving in ways that defied every prediction the Empire had made. General Dowan limped through the underground command center that had become the heart of Earth's resistance. His left arm was gone, lost in a battle 3 months ago when Imperial forces had briefly broken through to one of the deep cities. But his mind was sharper than ever, coordinating attacks across the solar system with a precision that impressed even his own staff. "Status report from all sectors," he commanded, settling into his command chair with the careful movements of a man who had given everything to this war. Captain Sujin, herself missing an eye from a spacecraft explosion, pulled up the latest tactical displays. "Sir, we have confirmed kills on 6 more Imperial vessels in the past week. The enemy fleet is down to approximately 30 operational ships. 30 ships, from 300. The numbers should have been impossible, but General Dowan had learned to expect the impossible from his people. "Casualties on our side?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would be heartbreaking. "We lost 12 pilots, 37 ground fighters, and 1 entire underground facility when the Imperial forces broke through Sector 7. But, sir," Captain Sujin's voice carried a note of pride that exhaustion could not hide. "The civilians in that facility held the line for 6 hours. They gave everyone else time to evacuate. That was the pattern that had emerged throughout the war. Every human loss seemed to make the survivors stronger, more determined, more creative in their resistance. Meanwhile, every Imperial casualty represented years of training and irreplaceable experience that the Empire could not quickly replace." Dr. Hana worked at her communication station, her fingers dancing across controls that combined human ingenuity with alien technology in ways that should have been impossible. She had lost 30 pounds during the war, surviving on emergency rations and pure determination, but her mind remained focused on the single goal that had sustained humanity through 8 months of hell. "General," she called across the command center, "I'm intercepting communications from the remaining Imperial fleet. Commander Jihan is preparing for what he calls a final assault on our population centers." General Dowan nodded grimly. They had always known this moment would come. The Empire would eventually realize that they could not win through conventional warfare and would attempt to destroy humanity through sheer overwhelming force. "How many ships is he planning to use?" Dowan asked. "All of them, sir. 30 vessels, concentrating their firepower on our 3 largest underground cities simultaneously." The general was quiet for a long moment, considering options that were all terrible. 3 underground cities held nearly 2 million people each, the largest concentrations of humanity still alive on Earth. If the Imperial forces could destroy those cities, they might finally break the resistance. "Dr. Hana," he said finally, "open a communication channel to the Imperial fleet, all frequencies. Sir, are you planning to negotiate?" "No," General Dowan replied with a cold smile. "I'm planning to give them one last chance to surrender." The communication went out across space, carrying the voice of a man who had watched his world burn but had never stopped fighting. "Commander, Jihan, this is General Dowan of the Earth Defense Forces. We know you are preparing for a final assault on our cities. Before you begin, I want you to understand something." In space, Commander Jihan received the transmission with surprise. No defeated enemy had ever contacted him to offer terms. He was curious enough to listen. "You came to our world believing you could conquer us easily," General Dowan continued. "You gave us one warning, thinking we would surrender out of fear. But you misunderstood something fundamental about humanity. We do not surrender. We do not accept defeat. We fight until the last person falls, and then we fight some more." Dr. Hana added her own voice to the transmission, speaking directly to the Imperial forces who had spent months trying to break human resistance. "Commander, we told you to leave our system when you first arrived. You chose to stay and fight. Now you understand why no force in Earth's history has ever successfully conquered our world. We do not fight to win. We fight because we refuse to lose." The final battle began at dawn, Earth time, though the concept of dawn had lost meaning. On a world where the sun was often blocked by the smoke of burning cities, Commander Jihan's 30 remaining ships descended through the atmosphere in perfect formation, their weapons charged and ready to end the war once and for all. But humanity had one final surprise waiting. The underground cities were not just shelters. They were the largest weapons ever constructed by human hands. Dr. Kyung-soo had spent months converting the massive underground complexes into planet-sized cannons, using reverse-engineered Imperial technology to create weapons that could fire directly into space. When the Imperial ships reached optimal firing position, the cities fired back. Energy beams that had been designed to crack planets now erupted from beneath Earth's surface, tearing through the Imperial fleet with devastating effect. The battle lasted 6 hours and cost both sides everything they had left. When the smoke cleared, Commander Jihan's ship was the only Imperial vessel still functional, and it was falling toward Earth's surface with critical damage to all major systems. On the ground, General Dowan sat in his command center, surrounded by reports of massive casualties and structural damage that would take decades to repair. The war was over, but victory had come at a price that would echo through human history. "Dr. Hana," he said quietly, "send a message to any Imperial forces that might still be listening. Tell them that Earth is still here, still free, and still ready to fight anyone who thinks they can take our world from us." The message went out across the galaxy, carrying news that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. Humanity had won, but the cost of victory had been almost everything they had to give. Admiral Taekwon's flagship limped through hyperspace like a wounded animal seeking shelter. The once mighty vessel that had led 300 warships to Earth now traveled alone, its hull scarred by human weapons that should never have existed. Half the crew was dead, the other half wounded, and the ship's computers struggled to maintain basic life support. The Admiral himself was barely recognizable as the proud warrior who had laughed at human defiance 9 months ago. His uniform was torn and stained. One of his forearms hung uselessly at his side, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had seen the impossible become reality. "Sir," reported the ship's damaged communication officer, "we are receiving priority transmissions from Imperial Command. Emperor Hyunsik is demanding an immediate report." Taekwon closed his eyes, knowing that the words he was about to speak would change the Empire forever. In 3 centuries of conquest, no Imperial force had ever returned home defeated. The very concept was so foreign that most Vorthak citizens did not even have words for military failure. "Open the channel," he said quietly. Emperor Hyunsik's holographic image filled the command center, his 4 eyes blazing with anticipation of victory. "Admiral Taekwon, finally, I trust you bring news of Earth's complete destruction and the successful integration of human survivors into our labor force." The silence that followed stretched for long seconds, while Taekwon gathered the courage to speak the unthinkable. "Your Imperial Majesty," he began, his voice cracking with exhaustion, "I regret to inform you that the conquest of Earth has failed." The word failed seemed to hang in the air like poison. Emperor Hyunsik's expression shifted from anticipation to confusion to something approaching terror. "Failed?" the Emperor repeated, as if the word was in a foreign language. "What do you mean failed? You commanded 300 warships against primitives who had never left their home system." "Sir, the humans were different. They adapted to our technology faster than our computers could calculate. They turned their entire planet into a weapon. They fought with tactics that made no logical sense, and they never stopped learning." From every battle, Admiral Taekwon pulled up the final casualty reports on his damaged display systems. Of 300 vessels, only my flagship survived. Of 300,000 Imperial soldiers, fewer than 1,000 remain alive. The humans destroyed our fleet using spacecraft built in underground workshops and weapons reverse-engineered from our own technology. The Emperor stared at the reports in disbelief. Such losses were not just unprecedented, they were unthinkable. The Imperial military machine had never faced serious resistance, let alone complete defeat. "Where are the humans now?" Hyunsik demanded. "Surely they must be weakened by the fighting. Sir, when I left Earth's system, they were already rebuilding. Their underground cities were expanding, their factories were producing new weapons, and their population seemed more determined than ever to remain free. They sent a final message as we retreated." The Emperor's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "What message?" Taekwon played the recording that would haunt Imperial leadership for generations to come. President Young-ho's voice speaking from the ruins of his world with unshakable determination. "Admiral Taekwon, you came to our world with threats and ultimatums. You burned our cities and killed our people, but you failed to understand the most important thing about humanity. We do not break. Take this message back to your Emperor. Some species cannot be conquered, only awakened. We warned you once to leave our system. We will not warn you again." The transmission ended, leaving Emperor Hyunsik staring at the display in stunned silence. For the first time in his reign, he faced a choice that no Vorthak ruler had ever confronted. Commit the Empire's entire military to destroying one primitive world, or accept that Imperial expansion had finally met an immovable obstacle. But the decision was being made for him across the galaxy. News of humanity's victory had spread through the Empire's communication networks faster than Imperial sensors could contain it. On worlds that had been conquered centuries ago, enslaved populations whispered in amazement about the primitives who had said no to the Empire and lived to tell about it. On Zerion Prime, the mining slaves who had worked in Imperial factories for 50 generations suddenly refused to report for their shifts. On Valdris, the agricultural workers who had fed Imperial colonies for decades began destroying their equipment and fleeing to the mountains. On Keth, the intellectual servants who had maintained Imperial databases started broadcasting seditious messages calling for freedom. The word rebellion had been almost forgotten in the Empire's controlled vocabulary, but now it sparked to life on dozens of worlds simultaneously. Subjugated species that had accepted their fate for centuries suddenly remembered what it meant to resist. Dr. Sunwoo's resistance network, which had begun as a desperate attempt to coordinate Earth's defense, had evolved into something the Empire had never imagined possible. A galaxy-wide communication system connecting every oppressed population in Imperial space. From her rebuilt command center deep beneath the ruins of Seoul, she coordinated with revolutionary leaders across the galaxy. "The humans have shown us all that the Empire can be defeated," she broadcast to hidden receivers on 100 worlds. "They are not invincible. They can be hurt, they can be scared, and they can be beaten." Emperor Hyunsik sat alone in his throne room, surrounded by reports of uprisings that his military was struggling to contain. The choice he faced was simple but impossible: send his remaining forces to finish what they had started on Earth, leaving the rest of his empire defenseless against rebellions, or abandon the conquest of humanity and watch his authority crumble across the galaxy. Either way, the empire that had ruled unchallenged for 3 centuries was beginning to fracture. And it was all because one small blue planet had refused to surrender when surrender was the only logical choice. President Young-ho's final broadcast reached every corner of Imperial space, carrying a message that would echo through history. To every species listening to this transmission, remember what you have learned today. Empires seem strong because they convince you they cannot be defeated. But we have proven that any tyranny can fall if enough people are willing to stand up and fight. The question is not whether you can win. The question is whether you are willing to try. The Galactic Empire had awakened something they could never control, the idea that freedom was worth any price, and that some species would rather die fighting than live in chains. The hunters had become the hunted, and across the galaxy the prey was learning to bite back. Earth remained unconquered, its people rebuilding from the ashes of their defiance, preparing for the day when the Empire would return. Because both sides knew this war was not over. It had only just begun. The warning had been heard across the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same.